The photograph fell out of the book like it had been waiting. I wasn't looking for anything that morning, just dusting shelves, rearranging the stack of novels I kept promising myself I'd read. My life had become a string of small domestic tasks like that lately, habits performed to create the illusion of control. I suppose that's why the photograph unsettled me so deeply. It didn't belong to any of my small rituals. It didn't belong to any part of my life at all. It fluttered onto the floor and landed face up. At first glance, it was unremarkable. A Polaroid, slightly yellowed, faint fingerprints along the edges, the white frame warped as if it had been pressed beneath something heavy for a long time. But the moment my eyes focused on the image, something hot and cold and impossible slid down my spine. It was my living room. My actual living room. The exact angle, exact lamp glow, exact blanket draped over the armrest, every detail identical to what I saw when I turned my head. Except for the woman. She sat on my sofa like she had every right to be there, bare feet tucked beneath her, dark hair falling in soft waves over her shoulder. Her posture was relaxed in a way that felt territorial, as if she wasn't visiting my home, but occupying it. I knelt to pick up the photo, my fingers trembling. I don't take Polaroids, I never have. And I certainly had never seen this woman before in my life. Her expression was what bothered me most. She was smiling, not wide, not theatrical, just a soft, serene curve of the lips. The kind of smile people wear when they're with someone they trust, or someone they're waiting for. My breath grew thin as I flipped the photo over. The handwriting on the back was neat, familiar, my handwriting, but not written in any way I recognized. The letters were shaped like mine, yes, but with a fluid confidence I hadn't felt in years. 4 words, "You forgot about me." I sank onto the carpet, legs suddenly useless. My mind darted through explanations, pranks, mistakes, coincidences, but each one dissolved as quickly as it formed. The cold truth settled in my chest. Someone had been in my home. Someone had taken this photograph. Someone knew how to write like me, and someone wanted me to find it. I stared at the woman's face for a long time, trying to place her. But the longer I looked, the more I felt the strangest sensation bloom in my chest, not fear. Recognition. A recognition I couldn't explain. Not yet. I didn't know it then, but the photograph wasn't the beginning. It was the warning. I kept the photograph on the table in front of me like evidence at a crime scene. The woman's face drew my eyes back again and again, no matter how many times I looked away. Something tugged at me, a faint mental itch, like a name hovering just beyond reach. I forced myself to catalog the details, the way I used to when I still had the energy to trust my own memory. Dark hair, bare feet, relaxed posture, a faint smudge on her left wrist, ink, a bruise, a birthmark. I shouldn't have cared, she shouldn't have meant anything to me. Yet the longer I stared, the more I felt an instinct I didn't want to name, like I should know her. I stood abruptly, needing distance from the image. My living room, my real one, felt suddenly foreign, as if the presence from the photograph still lingered in the air. I did a slow walk around, checking doors, windows, locks I already knew were secure. Everything was normal, too normal. The silence pressed in on me. I found myself waiting for a creak, a shift, a sound that would prove someone else was here. Prove I wasn't just imagining everything. But the house remained hollow and airless. I returned to the photograph and slid my finger along the glossy surface, tracing the outline of the stranger's face. My throat tightened. "Who are you?" I whispered. A ridiculous question. She couldn't answer. And yet, something in the photo watched back. Not literally, of course, but with a kind of quiet ownership, as if the woman knew something I didn't. My gaze drifted again to the handwritten message on the back. "You forgot about me." The words had weight now. They weren't a threat, not exactly. They felt more like a reprimand, a reminder, which made no sense. I pulled out my old journals, stacked in the closet, untouched for months. Maybe even years. I flipped through them, page after page filled with cramped handwriting, hoping to recognize her among memories, stray notes, forgotten acquaintances. Nothing. But then, in a journal from 2 years ago, one I barely even remembered writing, I found a line scrawled in the margin. "Don't let her in again." I froze, my breath caught halfway up my throat. Her. Again. My hand trembled as I flipped the pages back, searching for any other mention, any clue, but the margins were empty. The line stood alone, raw and urgent. I didn't remember writing it. I didn't remember who her was. But deep in my chest, I felt a slow, creeping dread because a part of me already knew. And before the night ended, I would discover I hadn't just forgotten her. I had invited her back. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, the photograph resting on the nightstand like an unblinking eye. I had tried putting it away, tucking it back into the book, sliding the book back onto the shelf, but my body reacted before my mind even understood why. I yanked it back out again, breath shallow, fingertips trembling. Keeping it near felt safer than letting it disappear again. At 11:42 p.m., when the rest of the world had thinned into quiet, a knock sounded at my door. A single knock, soft, measured, like someone asking for permission. My blood turned to ice. I held still, barely breathing, as if the intruder could sense motion through the walls. My first instinct was denial. It's the wind. It's a pipe. It's nothing. But every hair on my arms lifted, standing on end the way they only do when the body recognizes something before the mind does. The knock came again. 2 slow taps. Almost polite. I slid out of bed, feet touching the cold floor. The halls seemed longer in the dark, the shadows deeper. The air felt charged, an electric stillness that made the skin at the back of my neck prickle. As I approached the door, I glanced through the peephole. Nothing. No one. The hallway was empty, the building silent, but the knock had been real. I knew the sound of my own door, its hollow thud echoing through the frame. I pressed my ear against the wood, listening. Silence. I should have turned back, gone to bed, pretended it never happened. But instead, I unlocked the door. It's strange how danger doesn't always feel like danger. Sometimes it feels like inevitability, like something long overdue finally arriving. I opened the door just enough to peer out. Still nothing. The hallway stretched in both directions, empty and undisturbed. But something lay on the floor. A second Polaroid. My pulse hammered as I knelt and picked it up. The photograph was warm, oddly warm, as if it had been held in someone's hand only seconds ago. I lifted it to the dim light spilling from my bedroom. Another picture of my living room. But this time, the woman wasn't sitting on the sofa. She was standing, closer to the camera, closer to me. Her hair partially obscured her face now, but her smile, God, that strange, serene smile, was unchanged. And there, in the corner of the image, barely visible but unmistakable, was my own silhouette reflected in the mirror behind her. Not from tonight, not from any night I remembered. Someone had taken this while I was home. Someone had taken it while I was here. My throat closed around a scream that wouldn't come. The edges of the photo dug into my skin, grounding me in the wrongness of it. Then I flipped it over, more handwriting. Again in my script. Neat. Confident, not mine. Answer the door. My body went cold, because I hadn't heard the knock that followed. But I felt it. This time, the knock wasn't asking for permission. It was reminding me I'd already given it. The knock vibrated through the wood, not loud, not urgent, just expectant. A reminder of the words written on the back of the second photograph. Answer the door. I stood perfectly still, my hand frozen on the doorknob, breath held captive somewhere in my throat. I didn't dare look through the peephole again. I didn't dare open it. But the silence that followed wasn't comforting. It was thick, deliberate waiting. A soft exhale slipped from the other side. A person. A real, living person. Open the door, a woman's voice murmured. Not forceful, not threatening. Gentle, tired, almost familiar. My heart punched against my ribs. I backed away slowly, each step landing too loudly in the hush of the hallway. The voice wasn't raised, wasn't demanding. If anything, it sounded resigned. Like she already knew I'd refuse, or like she knew I eventually wouldn't. You don't have to be afraid, she said. Not of me. The words crawled under my skin. I scrambled back into my bedroom, locked the door behind me, even though it felt like locking a screen door during a hurricane, and pressed my back against it. My pulse throbbed in my ears. The building was silent. No footsteps. No retreat. No attempt to force entry. Just quiet. I didn't know how long I sat there. 5 minutes? 10? An hour? My phone lay on the nightstand, but the idea of calling someone felt absurd. What would I say? There's a woman outside my door who left photographs of my living room and sounds a little too much like me. The police wouldn't take me seriously. And worse, what if they did? What if they found no one? No prints? No evidence at all? The thought lodged itself in my gut. I pushed myself up, legs trembling, and forced my breathing into something steady. I needed to do something, anything, to reestablish a sense of safety. I returned to the living room and flicked on every light. Brightness flooded the space, warm and artificial. My eyes darted around, searching for signs of intrusion. The sofa cushions looked untouched. The blanket was folded exactly how I'd left it. The windows were locked. Everything was perfectly normal, painfully normal. And then I saw it, a small object on the coffee table that hadn't been there before, my ceramic mug. The chipped blue one I always left drying on the rack by the sink, now sitting neatly on a coaster, with a fresh ring of condensation forming at its base. Someone had drunk from it. Recently. My legs went weak. I gripped the back of the sofa to stay upright, a nauseating wave rolling over me. She hadn't just knocked, she had already been inside. Tonight, and I hadn't even noticed. The worst part wasn't that she was in my home, it was the growing certainty that she hadn't come to harm me. She had come because I invited her, once upon a time. I didn't sleep. Not really. I drifted in and out of something shallow and jagged, my mind replaying the mug on the table, the soft voice at the door, the feeling that every inch of my home had been touched by someone else's presence. By morning, the apartment felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate, like it remembered something I didn't. I moved through the rooms on autopilot, turning on lights I didn't need, touching objects I already knew were in their proper place, desperate for evidence of normality. My mind fought against the possibility that the intrusion had been real, but denial doesn't hold up well against fear. Fear is patient. It waits. By noon, I was standing in the kitchen, hands wrapped around the very mug she'd used, the warmth from my coffee seeping into my palms. I stared at the rim, half expecting to see a lipstick stain, a fingerprint, a smudge of something human enough to prove I wasn't imagining this unraveling. Nothing. Clean, as if washed. A shiver crawled along my spine. That was when I noticed the book on the counter. The one the first photograph had fallen from, I hadn't put it there. I hadn't touched it since yesterday. Slowly, heart thudding, I approached it. Something stuck out between the pages, just barely. A sliver of white. A corner of glossy paper. Familiar and unwelcome. Another Polaroid. My fingers hesitated above it, trembling with a mixture of dread and a strange compulsion I didn't want to acknowledge. But finally, as if pulled by a string tied around my chest, I slid the photo free. This one was different. It wasn't taken in the living room. It was taken in my bedroom. The shot was angled from the corner near the dresser, the one spot in the room I rarely entered. In the picture, the lights were off, the curtains drawn, everything dim except for a sliver of morning light leaking in from the hallway. And there I was, asleep. On my side, hair spread across the pillow, one arm tucked under it, completely unaware. The woman wasn't in this one, but the doorframe behind me was blurred as if something, or someone, had moved while the picture was being taken. The blur had the faint shape of a person. My stomach twisted. She had been in my room, standing over my bed, watching me sleep. I flipped the Polaroid over with shaking hands. A new message, written with that same confident curve of my handwriting. You promised you wouldn't forget. My knees nearly buckled. I braced myself against the counter, the world tilting, memories teasing the edges of my consciousness like shadows just outside a door. I didn't remember making a promise, but the handwriting, the phrasing, the intimacy, this wasn't a stranger reaching in from the outside. This was something reaching up from a place inside me. Because as I stared at those words, a horrifying, impossible realization settled in. I hadn't forgotten her. I had buried her. I don't know how long I stood there with the photograph pressed against my palm, my breath thin and uneven. The words on the back, you promised you wouldn't forget, coiled around something deep inside me. Not a memory exactly, more like the outline of one. A shape behind frosted glass. I sat down on the kitchen floor, the cool tile grounding me. I placed the 3 Polaroids in front of me in a neat row. The first, the woman on the sofa. The second, the woman closer with my silhouette behind her. The third, me asleep, something blurred and human standing over me. 3 intrusions. 3 messages, 3 pieces of a puzzle I had no conscious memory of constructing. I closed my eyes and forced myself to breathe. Slow, deliberate, like I used to teach myself during panic attacks years ago. Years ago, a flicker. Of a room not in this home. A mirror framed in chipped gold. A woman behind me, her breath warm against my ear. If you forget me, I'll come back. My eyes flew open, heart slamming against my ribs. No, no, that wasn't real. That wasn't a memory, just a trick of my fraying nerves. Except it had felt real. Too real. Hands shaking, I reached for my journals again, not the ones I had checked last night, the older ones. I wasn't looking for a particular year, just following a tremor of instinct that tugged me toward the bottom of the stack. I pulled out a journal with a torn spine and pages yellowed at the edges. Maybe 5, 6 years old. Maybe older, I wasn't sure. My handwriting then had been smaller, tighter, like I felt the need to compress myself into the margins. I flipped through the pages, each turn of paper making my pulse jump. Most entries were mundane, work stress, grocery lists, passing thoughts. But then, near the middle, I found it. A page written in red ink. My breath hitched. I never used red ink. The handwriting looked like mine, but looser, freer. Certain in a way that felt uncomfortably familiar after seeing the notes on the Polaroids. Only one line filled the page. "You don't get to erase me." The ink looked angry, dangerous, like each letter had been carved instead of written. I touched the words lightly, afraid they might smudge even after all this time. Another flicker of memory rose, unbidden, sharp, a door slamming. Crying, my own voice saying, "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep being her." I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at the red ink warning. My fingers hovered over the page, trembling like I was about to touch something alive. The house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like it's waiting, listening. Then I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible creak behind me. I froze, not from fear, from recognition. The sound was right, familiar, like the ghost of a memory I'd tried to smother. My chest tightened. My eyes darted to the mirror across the room. Nothing, or nothing I could identify. I stepped closer. The mirror's surface was dull, streaked from years of neglect. But as I leaned in, I saw her. Or me, dark hair falling over my shoulder. Bare feet tucked beneath me. Relaxed, serene, and the smile, that smile that had haunted every photograph. I wasn't moving, but she knew I was looking at me. Waiting. A tremor ran through my hands. My reflection shifted, almost imperceptibly, as though it had its own mind. I recoiled but couldn't look away. "I'm still here," a voice whispered, soft and intimate, brushing against the edge of my consciousness. I stumbled back. My breath came in sharp bursts. Every instinct screamed to run, hide, deny, but part of me wanted to believe her, or me, or whatever this was. That voice carried familiarity like a secret song buried deep in the folds of memory. Then the photographs slid across the counter. One by one, they fell in a perfect row, not by wind, not by me, by something deliberate. The first showed her on the sofa. The second, closer, my silhouette behind her. The third, me asleep, shadowed by her presence. And now the reflection in the mirror. All of them together, a timeline I hadn't lived, a story I hadn't allowed myself to remember. A truth I had buried under layers of denial, fear, and habit. I realized something horrifying. She wasn't just breaking through the barrier I'd built years ago. She was the barrier. My own self, fractured and hidden, stepping forward with a patience I could no longer resist. I wanted to scream, to call out, to deny. My voice caught in my throat. The mirror rippled, the edges warped. And the reflection smiled wider, knowing, certain, and impatient. I understood then. Not just in my mind, but in my chest, my bones, my pulse. I couldn't fight her. I couldn't hide from myself. The memories, the promises, the warnings, they weren't external threats. They were me, and I had run too long. The room darkened slightly, as though the light itself recoiled. I stepped closer, drawn by the impossible certainty in that reflection. And the whisper returned, now behind me, not from the glass. "You can't forget me anymore." Because the part of me I had buried had learned how to open the door. The whisper lingered, vibrating through my skull like a low, insistent drum. I wanted to flee, slam the door, erase everything, but my body refused. It was as if some invisible tether had wrapped itself around my chest and tied me to that reflection. The mirror's surface rippled again, not like water, like heat or air vibrating with intent. Her smile widened, serene but knowing. I couldn't look away. The longer I stared, the more the edges of the reflection blurred, until the woman in the glass wasn't just me. She was something older, something patient, something that had waited for years in the dark corners of memory. Then the lights flickered. A shadow stretched across the room, growing longer, thicker, pooling beneath my feet. I stepped back, heart hammering, and it moved with me, not an imitation of my movements, but independent, purposeful. It flowed like smoke, sliding along the walls, curling around furniture, coiling toward the living room. I wanted to scream, my voice caught. My hands shook violently. The photographs, they lifted from the counter as if caught in a breeze I couldn't feel. One floated toward me, hovering midair. The first, the sofa photo, spun slowly, then settled on the floor with the softest click. "You've tried to hide," she whispered again, closer this time, the sound brushing my ear without a body in sight. But hiding only made it stronger. I realized with a sudden, terrifying clarity that every space I'd occupied, every room I'd walked through in the past few days, had been mapped, remembered, claimed by her. Not the woman, me. The part of me I thought I'd buried. And now she was awake. The shadow reached the doorway. It paused, stretching, quivering like a predator savoring the moment. I backed up, chest tight, hands brushing the walls. My reflection in the mirror, her reflection, leaned forward, gaze piercing, unblinking. The room felt impossibly small. Every object, every surface, every inch of air seemed charged with awareness. "You can't leave," she said softly, each word a pulse inside my skull. "You can't ignore what you made me." I stumbled, almost falling, and the photographs fell in a neat line at my feet. I realized with sick clarity that the line of images wasn't just a warning. It was a map, a path, and the shadow was tracing it, moving along the route I had unknowingly carved for her. The mirror flickered one last time. Her smile didn't change, but her eyes, my eyes, held a promise. A promise I wasn't ready for. Because once she crossed the threshold fully, there would be no going back, and I wasn't sure the part of me that remained would survive her return. The shadow reached the center of the living room and paused, folding into itself like smoke obeying some secret command. My chest heaved, lungs burning. I wanted to run, to flee into the street, into anyone's arms, but my feet refused. They were rooted to the floor, anchored by dread and recognition. The mirror rippled violently, and the reflection stepped forward, not from the glass, but from the threshold of memory. Her presence filled the room, pressing against the air, pressing against me. I could feel her pulse against mine, a heartbeat synchronized, unyielding, inevitable. "You can't fight me," she whispered. Her voice was mine, yet it wasn't. It was softer, colder, and infinitely patient. "I've waited. I've always been here, buried under your walls, sleeping in your forgetfulness." My hands shook as I raised them, unsure whether to defend myself or surrender. The photographs on the floor vibrated, spinning slowly in a circle, each image shimmering faintly, projecting pieces of memory I had tried to bury. The sofa, the bedroom, the shadows, fragments of promises and fears I had forgotten. I don't remember," I croaked, voice breaking. I can't." Her smile widened, but her eyes darkened with something heavier. "No, you remembered, and that is why I'm here. You called me back without knowing it. Every thought, every avoidance, every lock on every door, it was all a summons." The room tilted, walls bending like the inside of a dream. The shadow detached from the corners and coiled around my legs, warm and urgent, pulling me forward, closer to her. Every instinct screamed danger, yet another part, a part I barely recognized, wanted to lean in, to let the tether take me. I stumbled backward, knocking over the last Polaroid. It slid across the floor and stopped at the threshold of the hallway. I froze. My reflection, her reflection, paused too, watching me with patient inevitability. "You built me here," she said softly, "piece by piece, memory by memory. And now that I am whole, you cannot unmake me." The air thickened. My head swam. I realized in a gut-scorching instant that this wasn't about her breaking in, it was about me breaking apart. My own self, fractured and forgotten, had grown patient, calculated, and unstoppable. I wanted to fight. I wanted to resist. But the knowledge pressed in. I wasn't just facing someone else. I was facing me, the part I had promised never to see again. And she had waited longer, grown stronger, and learned my weaknesses. Because when she steps fully into the world, there will be no shadow left for me to hide in, and I may not survive the person I once tried to bury. The air in the room was thick, almost viscous, pressing against my chest. Every shadow seemed to lean closer, every light dimmed as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I stood frozen, heart hammering, knowing that the reflection in the mirror and the shadow that moved independently across the floor was no longer a fragment of memory. She was here, fully. I tried to speak, but my voice failed. My throat tightened as if the words I wanted to use were swallowed by some invisible hand. The photographs on the floor glimmered faintly, and for a moment I saw them not as pictures, but as windows, snapshots of a life I had never allowed myself to remember, a life where she had existed openly, freely, and I had buried her out of fear. "You can't run from me," she said, stepping closer. The sound of her bare feet on the hardwood echoed in the quiet apartment. "And you don't want to." I realized with a cold clarity that she was right. This wasn't a fight. There was no escaping. Every lock, every glance in the mirror, every denial I had conjured over the years had done nothing to stop her. Because she wasn't an intruder. She was me. The part I had tried to destroy, to erase, to forget, and it had survived. Waiting, growing, learning. I stumbled backward until my shoulder hit the wall, my pulse pounding so loudly it seemed to fill the room. And then I saw her eyes. Not just in the mirror, but in every reflective surface. The glass of the picture frames, the kitchen window, the silverware. They were patient, knowing, unyielding. They weren't angry, not exactly. They were expectant. "Do you remember now?" she asked softly. "Do you remember why you tried to hide me?" I shook my head, tears pricking, a laugh caught somewhere between fear and recognition. I thought I could forget you. I thought I could bury you and move on." Her smile deepened. "No, you cannot bury yourself. I am part of you, always have been, and now you must let me in." The shadow dissolved into her form, coalescing until there was no separation, no reflection, no specter, only her. And in that moment, I understood. This was not a threat. This was reclamation. The part of me I had buried was not lost. She had been waiting for me to accept her, to stop running, to stop fearing what I could not unmake. I dropped to my knees. The photographs lay around me, silent witnesses to my surrender. And for the first time in years, I breathed freely, not in relief, but in recognition. The woman stepped closer, placing a hand on my shoulder. It was my hand, my warmth, my presence. Because some things you cannot forget, and some parts of yourself, once buried, will always find their way back through the door you thought was locked.